Hi, I'm Greg Cotter. Thanks for joining us and welcome to the very first LIVEsciences podcast. Today we're talking with Timm and it's all about Teal. Timm, you started LIVEsciences a few years ago, 3.5 years ago now. So you've been in business for a while. You've worked in the consulting world. I have to ask you, what was the moment when you decided, I got to start LIVEscience?
Actually, the thing is, there was not the moment for LIVEscience. It was more like a thinking process over, 9 months, a year maybe. But there was that one moment where I thought you need to experiment with a Teal organization setup. And it was basically, when I read the book 2015, that was immediate. I thought, that's one, pretty naive, but two, cool enough to try anyway.
Okay.
That was the starting point.
And would that at the time have been too far out there for the traditional consulting world?
Probably would have been for most companies, I guess. So starting greenfield, being able to build it yourself is a huge advantage compared to transforming a company. And certainly in a consultancy world where many companies operate in a pretty top-down type of behavior, would have probably been a big step.
Okay, so let's go to the Teal model. 3 aspects: self-management, wholeness, and evolutionary purpose. Let's start at the top. Self-managed. Now, a self-managed organization, I understand your LIVEsciences is self-managed.
That is correct, yeah.
Okay, so authority is distributed. So for our listeners, how does that work?
Well, basically it means that we have clarity about our roles and responsibilities, who's doing what. We have a lot of clarity around decision authorities for roles, people, panels, committees, whatever it is. Actually, that's pretty small for us, of course.
Sure.
But the main thing really is everyone's entitled to take decisions.
Okay.
And basically do whatever makes sense. So do the right thing.
So is a lot of the authority based on a person's knowledge or experience or expertise? So they have the knowledge in that area, so they should be taking the decision rather than the boss.
So there's 2 options. One is it's with the role. So if you are having a marketing role, for example, you will take a decision around the website. If you have the marketing role, but you don't have the most experience around marketing or websites maybe, well, then you probably know who in the company you should talk to who has more experience, and then you find out. But on a day-to-day basis, clearly, mostly it's based on experience, knowledge that you had acquired over the years.
Okay, so it's not like your traditional hierarchical top-down company. It's flatter and self-organized.
Exactly. The beauty of it is, like, for me, when I worked for the other consultancy, which is a bit more traditionally organized, you had to sign off a ton of expense sheets.
Okay.
And I was, of course, highly paid being the management team, right?
Sure.
So is that the best value for money from a company perspective? Is that the most exciting job for me as a person to develop? Both times probably no is the answer. So it does make a lot of sense. And also the other thing you create, especially in bigger organizations, is bottlenecks in regards to taking a decision, taking a decision.
Yeah.
And this is what we're trying to get around, that we say, well, everyone's entitled and empowered to take decisions, so you can take it more or less immediately. You might want to ask for input.
Sure. Now, that's in LIVEsciences, which is a small company. Let's go to a big company in large organizations. How does that work? I mean, you work with large organizations. Have you a good example where they've adopted that or tried that and it has worked?
There's actually a ton of examples out there. And frankly, if I say what we're doing, you're probably like, well, you could have done that in a hierarchy as well. So you document your roles and responsibilities. You document the decision authority that's going with the role or the committee or the body or whatever you have. And then the other thing is you document your decision-making process. The only thing is that in hierarchies, we usually don't document that well enough because you have a job description that's outdated tomorrow or doesn't tell you much about what you're actually doing. We rarely have a decision-making process documented in bigger companies. The only default rule you have is we go 2 or 3 levels up if we don't know or if we don't want to take the decision. That's the other round. So documenting roles and decision authority is key, and we've done that in all sorts of different companies, up to 100,000 people. And it does work in a way that you get clarity on who's doing what and who's deciding what. Okay. Not saying it's easy to have an understanding of 100,000 people's different decision authorities, but that's the part we need to work on.
And is it difficult for companies, large companies, to adapt that, given that they've probably operated in a pretty hierarchical way for probably some of them over 100 years?
Totally not straightforward, of course not. There's all sorts of different hurdles. You have policies in place, you have processes in place, you have a lot of history as leadership teams or as teams working together. Of course, you have different egos and characters in your leadership teams usually as well. So you have all sorts of politics going on, and breaking these silos, these politics, these little kingdoms. That's the job. But that's what we're talking about for years and decades, probably, if we talk about reorganizing organizations.
Let's move on to the second part of the model, wholeness. Now, the idea here is that you bring all of yourself to work, your personality, the things that make us unique, the quirks, warts and all, as we say in English. So how does that, for example, work in life science?
Probably one of the more difficult things personally, since I'm more a head-heavy person and not so much the emotional type of person. But of course, it brings a lot of advantages. So if I don't know, told you before that I didn't sleep too well tonight because of the little ones being sick, and so was not too much sleep. So I'm just able to tell people about that, and I'm able to talk about the vulnerability that might bring. And they're accepting it, and actually what you will see is that people react positively to these kind of things because they're taking it into account.
So in a small company, you have your characters. You work a lot with larger organizations. There's prescribed behaviors, there's feedback loops. There possibly is a sense with a lot of people that political correctness is maybe too pervasive. Again, have you got an example you can share with us where a large organization, with your help, has managed to overcome that hurdle?
Many big companies talk about this space of psychological safety and how to create that for years, for decades actually. And definitely more difficult task for a bigger company with all the politics and everything going on. But if you have a small enough team, or you have an area you work with and you break it up into small enough chunks of 7, maybe 10, maybe 15 people maximum, then you can work on getting to know each other, working together on certain tasks, maybe also celebrating some successes together is usually pretty good, or get drunk together is the other option. And of course, we've done that and achieved it in smaller teams. But if we talk about bigger areas, some 100 or some 1,000 people, then that's a huge task, and it's nothing you achieve overnight.
Third aspect, evolutionary purpose. Sounds very Darwinian. Explain it to me in 30 seconds.
In 30 seconds, it's your North Star. It's your direction. The impact you want to have if you go, or if the company is not existing anymore. What's the one thing people should remember you for? Okay,
so the North Star for life sciences would be, I think you've expressed it as unleashing the potential in people.
Exactly. So this is kind of the working purpose in a way, if you wish.
Yes.
There's a fancy one behind where we talk about how Teal practices could potentially change the world and how we run businesses and how the ecosystem around businesses is really run. And we talk about sustainability, and I mean climate change is pretty obvious at the moment as well. But yes, unleashing people and their potential in bigger organizations, that's really the purpose, and that's what we try to do every day with little small steps, or with actually big bangs in some cases too.
Okay, and how you do that? Is it a constant coaching? Is it a workshop? Is it a training? What's the mix in there that works?
All sorts of different starting points. Some people read the book like I did 4 years ago, and they're as intrigued as I am, and they just want to change the way of working. There's people out there who just hear agility, which is a huge hype right now, and that's the starting point. And we start up with a little exploration. What are the companies out there doing? What could you potentially do in your setup? But of course, changing culture, changing the ways you work, routines, practices, all that takes a while. So usually the most effective approach is accompanying, coaching, mentoring teams in areas for 6 months, maybe a year.
Okay, so it can be a long-term transformation for them.
Exactly.
Okay. Now you've touched on agile and the agile flavor. Now, presumably here in Switzerland, you work with a lot of maybe scientific or pharma companies. Now, knowing that mindset as I do and you do, it's an analytical mindset. It pilots, plans, measures, it plots, it controls, creates processes, KPIs, everything. How does that mindset fit, or does it need to change and adapt to be agile? Or is it compatible?
Probably it's compatible to a certain extent. Always depends how extreme the whole mindset really is, because the thing is, of course, of certain things you need to let go, and we know that we can't predict how the future really looks like in 3 or 5 years, right? If you think about the smartphones are only there for 10 years, how many people would have predicted where we are today? So that's pretty much impossible. So you need to recognize that. On the other hand side, talking about pharmaceutical industry in Basel is quite obvious, and they have a history of experimenting, right? There's no new drug without experimentation. Sure. So this kind of mindset helps a lot, of course, in regards to agility, Teal practices.
Okay. From your experience out there, do you think that companies are thinking of all sizes are thinking agile is the future?
I think some think it's just the next thing and it'll be gone in 2 or 3 years, and they just wait for the next thing to come. I talk to many senior leaders, also in bigger companies, who believe that there's a fundamental change to how business is done. And if you look at the pace that things are changing, it's likely that this one's staying around. It'll be a bit more or clearer defined, maybe. It's a bit clearer on what kind of practices you might need. There will be more experiences out there because there's only a handful of companies who have more than 5 or 10 years of experience with these kind of practices.
So agile is still pretty young.
Depends who you ask,
yes,
right? If you go like mainstream, then it's probably pretty young, outside the software industry at least. But there's all sorts of agile practices there for 30, 40, 50 years. So it's not like everything's new. It's just in a mainstream, broad application, it's pretty new.
Do you think that people who are maybe even entering the workforce now, do you think that they will demand to be part of that kind of environment in the future?
It's always difficult to talk about
it's impossible
human
to predict the future.
beings as a group, as one group, but I do think that there's a tendency that identification with status and impact is changing in slightly, or actually quite significantly for some areas of the world, at least for the developed countries.
Yeah.
So people are looking for different things to get fulfilled or to be fulfilled. And I think that Teal organizations will have an impact.
So you would think that self-management, wholeness and evolutionary purpose will be more important in organizations of all different sizes over the coming future?
I do think so. And if you look into what big companies are doing nowadays, they talk a lot about the purpose that they're having, about the impact they're having on society or environmentally as well. And I do think it will get more important to not just talk the talk, but actually walk it. And I do think that different organizational structures are needed for that.
Thanks for joining us and giving us your insights, which are most interesting, and we hope the listeners find them enjoyable.
Thank you very much. Pleasure being here.